Hi, I'm Peter Willis from Lequin Training, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how to have an impact in meetings. There are three elements. First is how purpose is key to having an impact. Secondly, pre-meeting preparation and getting into the right mindset. And finally, some tips for what to do in the actual meeting itself.
I think it's fair to say that a lot of people turn up to meetings without a clear agenda. They're not really quite sure why they're there. So one of the key things we do at Lequin is to get people thinking about their purpose and their purpose at work, rather than simply a reason for attending the meeting, but having a clear purpose to why they're turning up at work each day. And that's the foundation stone then for making an impact, not just in meetings, but at work. Once you have a clear purpose, then you can get tactical and think about, what do I want to get out of this meeting? And then this will allow you to get into the right frame of mind to make an impact. Those people who have a strong sense of self and they combine this with a purpose can create real presence and impact. And I think Mark Zuckerberg, he famously is all about getting the world communicating. Henry Ford is giving people the freedom to travel. Bill Gates is getting a PC in everyone's home, and Michelle Obama is education for girls. And it's very clear that these guys have purpose, and with that comes the impact. And at Lequin, we're always getting people to think about their purpose. And there's a nice quote here from Jack Cranfield: clarify your purpose. What's the why behind everything you do? When we know this in life, it's very empowering and the path is clear. One of the key things with having presence and impact is having a very strong sense of self, of who you are. And people who don't have that, they will have a lack of presence, or they may come across as arrogant or negative. Someone with very little presence, for instance, will be unsure of themselves, or they'll want to please others. Having a strong sense of self is very important in building presence and impact. And when we don't have a strong sense of self, a fragile sense of self, that shows up in two respects. We might have no presence, so we're unsure of who we are and we're unsure what to say, or we want to be pleasing others. And that comes across as, in others' perceptions, as someone who's simply not worth listening to, or ineffective, or lacking confidence. The flip side of that, people who come across as arrogant and have a negative impact, they're still unsure on themselves, but they need to show how much they know and who's the boss, and to be in control and to be right. And very often they'll go on the attack, the best form of defence. These are your normal office bullies, and they tend to be very loud and aggressive, and they don't listen to others. People with a strong sense of self, they have real presence and a positive impact because they know who they are, they know what they're doing. So it means if other people disagree with them, that's just their opinion. It's not something which is going to derail them. And in their mind, everyone's worth listening to. There is no case where someone is better or less important than themselves. And being comfortable in your own skin, and then this comes across as this issue, this concept that people know what this individual knows what they're talking about. They have respect and they're worth listening to. Now you know your purpose, the next step is to know what you want to get out of the meeting, and then that can follow on with getting into the right mindset and having the impact that you want to have. So a lot of people don't ask the question, why has the meeting been called? And I think if you're unsure, you really do need to find out. Or if you think there's a hidden agenda, it's worth also exploring that. I think there are 4 reasons that meetings are called. First of all, there's the classical case of communication, giving and receiving feedback, what's happened since the last meeting, giving updates and reports. And the key there is to ask yourself, what information do you need and what extra information might impress? A second reason a meeting might be called is for decision making and getting commitments. So one of the key things here is to think about how you influence others, and key to that is how you adapt your style to the various people's different personality types and ways of thinking in that meeting. So being clear on how you're going to influence. Ideas generation is a third reason for calling meetings, and that's simply about brainstorming to come up with ideas. So again, some pre-preparation is quite important here. Blamestorming is a fourth reason a meeting might happen, and that's finding, naming and shaming victims. And if you suspect the meeting is about this, it's important that you act before the meeting. or if not, diffuse the meeting by taking responsibility for what was your responsibility, and then defining in the meeting what safeguards you've already put in place to stop it happening again. These lead on to understanding why you were invited, or perhaps why you're not invited. And it's also important to understand, do you really need to be there? If you don't need to be there, what impact are you really going to make? So sitting in the corner and not saying anything could actually be worse than not turning up in the first place. Once you understand why the meeting has been called and the reasons for the meeting and why you're invited, then it's important to understand and to think about, what outcome do I want? How will this meeting support my purpose? Now you can prepare and get into the right mindset. Let's look at each of the 4 reasons why meetings are called in turn. Let's look at the communication meeting. The preparation for that is, what information do you need? What extra information might impress? And following through on the mindset might be, I want to come across as a safe pair of hands. What information do I need? What extra information do I need to bring that would promote that image? Looking at the second reason for calling a meeting, which is decision making, the preparation you need to do is to think about, who are the stakeholders? What do each of those want to get from the meeting? And what type of personality do each of those people have? What are their motivations? And think about some of the objections they might have to some of the things you're promoting. And the mindset going into that meeting would be, I have effective influencing skills. Let's look at the third reason that meetings are called, and that's ideas generation. Coming prepared with ideas and also being prepared to build on others' ideas. So you can come with some ideas that you pre-planned, but also you need to be in that thinking space to build on others, to listen to others. And the mindset for that might be, I encourage collaborative creativity. And finally, blamestorming. So we've talked about this. So before the meeting, identify what the problem is. Identify whether or not you are part of that problem. Be prepared to take responsibility for that. Also, come prepared with a solution so that people understand that you are already taking some actions towards prevention and what future preventative action you'll take to make sure these things don't happen again. And the mindset for that might be, I'm prepared to own and learn from my mistakes. Here's a good pre-meeting tip for you, which is a mental rehearsal, which a lot of sports people go through before they go into matches or even during matches. And this is about an NLP exercise called third positioning. So the first step is to make a picture of yourself in the third person performing well in the meeting. Notice how positively people are reacting to the impact you're having in that meeting. Step 2 is to step into you in the picture and feel how you feel, to think and take on all the beliefs that person has about being successful and impacting. And then you feel, hear and see how well people are reacting to you. And it's a really neat, very quick mental rehearsal you can do before each meeting. As an exercise, I'd like you to think now about a meeting you're going to go to next week. Think about, what kind of a meeting is it? What preparation do you need to do? And what mindset do you need to get into? And again, you might want to close your eyes and mentally rehearse this meeting and see yourself walking into the room, notice the impact you're going to have when you speak and listen, and then step into that impact for you. So we've looked at your purpose, we've looked at the meeting objective, we've looked at how you're going to prepare and how to get into the right mindset. Now let's look at the meeting itself. Let's look at some tips for dealing with the meeting. I think one of the main mistakes people have in meetings is believing that first and foremost they need to be talking and they need to be saying something of importance. But the people who often make the most impact in meetings are those who are able to build on others' ideas, and they can only do that if they're listening. And people will start to ignore people who don't listen, and they will seek out people who do listen and who do look to validate what they're saying. And I think people who really listen well are extremely rare. So those that do will make a real impact in meetings. and I quite like this quote from the Dalai Lama: when you talk, you're only repeating what you already know, but if you listen, you might learn something new. When the attention is on ourselves and we're interrupting or sharing, it's the main reason for that is because we've got something to say that we're desperate to say. So as a result, we half listen, and anything people are saying, we're half taking in because we're waiting for our turn to say something. As well as listening, obviously we need to actually say something in a meeting, and I think a lot of people get themselves wound up with this idea they need to put across an important view or come up with an opinion, say something to impress. But very often, I think a really impactful way of getting people to adjust their thinking, of making people become aware of you, is to ask a series of questions. And there are 4 quite interesting questions. There's the purpose check question. So it's a case of saying, can I just check, at the end of this meeting, what is it that we have hoped to have achieved? You've got a pivot question, which is getting people back to the agenda. Case you've all been in meetings when people are waffling, things are going off agenda. I think we're moving away from the agenda. Let's get back to the point at hand. A third good question is just simply a summary check. And this is quite a simple one. A lot's been said, and I'd like to clarify my understanding. So can I summarise what I've heard? And that gets people just back into the moment again. And then there's a close with action. I'd like to be clear what action I'm going to be taking. Am I going to be calling such and such? Is this the next part on the agenda? And again, it's just closing out of meetings that people have action plans, and very often many of us walk away unclear of what we're going to be doing. And if you're the person leading that question, then you can make a real impact. A fifth and probably the most impactful question is the impact question. And it's used by the very best salespeople. In sales, and the same applies to making an impact in meetings, the most value you can add is to get your audience thinking about the issues they've not considered. To do this, we ask impact questions. We make people think deeper than any other forms of questions. We make your audience think or elicit and analyse an emotion. And the key thing in this is to, first of all, understand what the issues are in the room, show them you understand what the issues are, and then help them to understand the issues they've not considered. And 2 good examples of an impact question might be, given what you've just said, how will we change the way we approach that next time? Or another one, if we don't solve this particular challenge, what kind of difficulties are we faced with going forward? These are great impact questions, getting people to think. We're all interrupted in meetings, and it can be hugely frustrating. Here's a couple of tips to help you deal with it. If you're interrupted, look at the other person in the eye, then state firmly that politely you want to finish. So a couple of examples. John, I'm interested in what you've got to say, but I'd like to finish my point. Or John, I'll make a note of your question and I'll come back to you once I finish my point. And if this fails, look at the meeting chairperson and they should come to your aid. Another real challenge we all face in meetings is when we want to disagree with someone else's opinion. And I think the default position is to make someone else wrong or to talk over them. But there is a really good process for disagreeing with someone else's opinion. And the first thing is to make sure you understand their point of view. Secondly, if you can build on part of what they said, then you can do that. If you can agree with a part of what they said, again, do that. Don't make someone wrong. Just present a different perspective. So there's no right or wrong, it's just a different opinion. I agree with such and such, but I have a different view, or I feel that, are good ways of getting this across. The last thing to look at is physical presence, how you manage yourself physically. Quite an important thing people don't often consider is where they sit in the room. In one-to-one meetings, if possible, try to sit next to the person, not across the table from them. That obviously creates a barrier. You can create more personal connection. And very often in coaching, we will sit next to the individual so we can read their body language and they can read ours. In group meetings, make sure you have direct eye contact with the chair. So if there are oblong-shaped tables, try and get across from the chair. I wouldn't sit directly opposite the chair because that's the most confrontational, but if you try and make sure that you have direct contact with the chairperson. So if you need to ask them to come to your aid for whatever reason, or if you want to say something important, you can direct it to that individual. Your posture is very important as well. And you might want to do this consciously think about how you are sitting and sitting with a straight back. Neuroscience has shown that if you are looking up, rather than looking down, it puts you in a much more positive frame of mind, as well as obviously putting across a much more positive perspective to other people. Looking at the other person who's speaking, and actively engaging. So I think it's quite important just to put your phone away and perhaps take a moment to stop writing notes and to engage with the individual who's speaking and look them in the eye. So we've started looking at why you are turning up to work, your purpose and your why, and that's very important. That's something we look at a lot at Lequin. When you have this purpose, you can then start looking at pre-meeting preparation and getting into the right mindset. These lead on from one another, and then we've looked at some of the tips around what you do in the actual meeting. And if you apply all this will help you improve your impact in meetings. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this workshop.